Hello and welcome to the session on subjective idealism. Subjective idealism or empirical idealism is generally identified or associated with immaterialism, the doctrine that material things do not exist. Subjective idealism rejects dualism, neutral monism and materialism. Indeed, it is the contrary of eliminative materialism, the doctrine that only material things and no mental things exist. Subjective idealism is a fusion of phenomenalism or empiricism, which confers special status upon the immediately perceived, with idealism, which confers special status upon the mental. Idealism denies the knowability or existence of the non-mental, while phenomenalism serves to restrict the mental to the empirical. Subjective idealism thus identifies its mental reality with the world of ordinary experience, rather than appealing to the unitary world spirit of pantheism or absolute idealism. This form of idealism is subjective not because it denies that there is an objective reality, but because it asserts that this reality is completely dependent upon the minds of the subjects that perceive it. The earliest thinkers identifiable as subjective idealists were certain members of the Yogacara school of Indian Buddhism, who reduced the world of experience to a stream of subjective perceptions. Subjective idealism made its mark in Europe in the 18th century writings of George Berkeley, who argued that the idea of mind independent reality is incoherent, concluding that the world consists of the minds of humans and of God. Subsequent writers have continuously grappled with Berkeley's skeptical arguments. Immanuel Kant responded by rejecting Berkeley's immaterialism and replacing it with transcendental idealism, which views the mind independent world as existent but incognizable in itself. Since Kant, true immaterialism has remained a rarity, but is survived by partly overlapping movements such as phenomenalism, subjectivism and perspectivism. Thinkers such as Plato, Plotinus and Augustine of Hippo anticipated idealism's anti-materialism with their views of the inferior or derivative reality of matter. However, these Platonists did not make Berkeley's turn toward subjectivity. Indeed, Plato rationalistically condemned sense experience, whereas subjective idealism presupposed empiricism and the irreducible reality of sense data. A more subjectivist methodology could be found in the Pyrrhonist emphasis on the world of appearance, but their skepticism precluded the drawing of any ontological conclusions from the epistemic primacy of phenomena. Let us move to the second module, history. The first mature articulations of idealism arise in Yogacaran thinkers such as the 7th century epistemologist Dharmakirti, who identified ultimate reality with sense perception. The most famous proponent of subjective idealism in the Western world was the 18th century Irish philosopher George Berkeley. Although Berkeley's term for his theory was immaterialism, from the point of view of subjective idealism, the material world does not exist and the phenomenal world is dependent on humans. Hence, the fundamental idea of this philosophical system, as represented by Berkeley, is that things are complexes of ideas or sensations, and only subjects and objects of perceptions exist. Berkeley summarized his theory with the motto esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived, but went on to elaborate it with God as the source of consensus, reality and other particulars. According to Berkeley, an objective has real being as long as it is perceived by a mind. God, being omniscient, perceives everything perceivable. Thus, all real beings exist in the mind of God. However, it is also evident that each of us has free will and understanding upon self-reflection, and our senses and ideas suggest that other people also possess these qualities as well. According to Berkeley, there is no material universe. In fact, he has absolutely no idea what that could be possibly mean. To theorize about a universe that is composed of insensible matter is not a sensible thing to do. This matters because there is absolutely no positive account for a material universe, only speculation about things. Berkeley's view of idealism. The least accepted form of idealism and one of the most misunderstood is that of George Berkeley, whose term was from 1685 to 1752. Berkeley is often listed as the second great member of the empiricist tradition, which includes Locke, Berkeley and Hume. While sharing some ideas on the theory of knowledge, Berkeley is not a skeptic in the sense that Hume and the empirical tradition were. Berkeley is famous for his views on vision, which became the accepted view of his day, but his philosophical position was not so acclaimed. His principal works for philosophical consideration are Principles of Human Knowledge and Dialogues between Hyles and Philonous. Berkeley never achieved acceptance to create a tradition or a following, but his philosophy raised questions that required answers from a variety of traditions yet to come. We will now turn to his specific views. Reality. Berkeley's view of reality may be briefly summed in the statement, from what has been said it follows there is not any other substance than spirit or that which perceives. How does Berkeley come to this position? Several steps may be seen in his thinking. First, Berkeley reviews the different attitudes held in the past concerning the analysis of an object, for example, a cherry, and how it was known to a person. At first, it was thought that color, figure, motion, and the rest of the sensible qualities or accidents did really exist without the mind in something called matter. Thus, the roundness or primary quality, as Locke called it, is the cherry as well as the redness or secondary quality, as Locke called it. Both of these qualities were believed to be supported by something known as third quality called the substratum. This may be called matter. This view or analysis above was modified by Locke when he believed that the primary qualities exist truly in the substratum and outside the mind. They were not subject to variations of size or shape from person to person. They were objective. But in Locke, the secondary qualities became subjective and existed only in the mind. They are related to the object but not in it. The redness of a cherry cannot be compared because of color subjectivity. Against all of this, Berkeley concludes that if secondary qualities are only in the mind, then primary qualities are also only in the mind. Moreover, a big thrust of Berkeley is directed against the tertiary quality, the substratum. It does not exist at all. Matter is never seen as Berkeley speaks of it. Consistency must be maintained about how we know secondary and primary qualities. Both of them must ride in the same boat. Either all of them are out there in the objects or all in here in the mind. Now, as a matter of fact, according to Berkeley, matter does not exist, that is, the substratum or tertiary qualities. What exists then? Only ideas exist. Berkeley's use of the word idea as a substitute for matter is a little unusual. An idea sounds vacuous and non-existing, but he prefers the word because it does not have the idea of something that exists which is not seen, namely the substratum. An idea is something that is perceived and exists in the mind. An idea is real. It is seen, felt, tasted, touched and smelled, as in the experience of perceiving a cherry. All other real things or ideas are perceived in the same way. Berkeley allows that ideas may exist unperceived by himself and he may live and die without ever perceiving them. But for them to exist, they must be perceived by someone. It may seem that Berkeley is playing down perceiving in the human experience, but actually the big thrust in his view of reality is to trust one's senses. One never perceives the substratum or matter, and hence it is absurd to believe in it. What one does perceive is an idea of the cherry's roundness, color, moistness and tartness. This raises the question of how we know. Berkeley maintained that we do know and do perceive. No philosopher in Berkeley's day knew how to explain how a material object, if it existed, could affect a mind. If material objects did exist, they would be powerless, inert and have no ability to cause anything to happen. Moreover, objects do not know other objects, that is, a cherry does not know another cherry. Thus, an object cannot cause itself to be placed in the mind. Thus, our knowing is related to ideas which are impressed upon us from outside mostly. We can imagine naturally, but the bulk of our perceiving comes from outside of the mind. Since matter does not exist, then the ideas must be caused by something spiritual and active. At this point, you may become confused. Berkeley declares that ideas do not have existence outside of a mind that perceives them. This tends to be quickly read to a conclusion that nothing exists unless I perceive it. We have seen above that Berkeley admitted the existence of things that he did not personally perceive. Berkeley's full explanation must be carefully observed. The real cause of ideas is an incorporeal active substance or spirit. The main source of our ideas is the author of nature or God Almighty. We can have ideas in our mind as we will them in dreams and the like, but most ideas come from God, who sustains the creation from alternately being there and then disappearing when I sleep and awake. Nothing in creation is changed from the laws of the nature because of Berkeley's views. He noted, ideas imprinted on the sense are real things or do really exist. This we do not deny, but we deny that they can subsist without the minds which perceive them. This quotation may give some context for understanding Berkeley's most famous quote, "To be is to be perceived." In other words, if someone, ultimately God, does not perceive it, it does not exist. In short, Berkeley uses the analysis of knowing to show that matter in the philosophic senses of his day did not exist. What is experienced is ideas which are spiritual in nature, produced by either my mind, your mind, or God's. Berkeley does not deny that we perceive bodies, trees, seas, or bees. But what we perceive is an idea, and an idea reflects the realm of the spirit, not matter. Berkeley used this argument based on a theory of knowledge to argue against materialism and atheism in his day. Although it was very difficult, if not impossible to refute, very few philosophers have followed Berkeley in these views. Man. There is no reason to suppose any extraordinary view about man in Berkeley's thought. In his stress on common sense, he thinks with the learned but speaks with the vulgar. The common man expresses common sense in his observation of life. As a bishop, Berkeley held to the view of God's creation of man, but he follows the views of his day, incorporating some aspects of Greek philosophy. He spoke of man's soul as being indivisible, incorporeal, unextended, and it is consequently incorruptible. Although death comes to the body and changes take place as aging comes, the soul of man is naturally immortal. There is an important point of view concluded from Berkeley's view of perception. The universe undoubtedly appears to be anthropocentric. Berkeley lived in a time when important scientific revolutions were taking place in the new astronomy of Copernicus and the works of Newton. The revolution meant that man was no longer the center of the universe, but now a mere spectator in a world whose center had shifted far away from him. The new views have continued to the modern era in which man is a child of nature and is intermeshed within nature. Man's arrival is just a fortuitous event in the history of the planet. But Berkeley did not accept a fortuitous explanation for man's existence. Common sense and common observation still keep man oriented in the direction of anthropocentricity, or the idea that man is the center of the universe. In his work Alciphron, Berkeley stresses the importance of man's freedom. Like many other philosophers before him, he declares that freedom is the foundation of morality and religion. Without freedom, man is not accountable for his actions. With freedom, responsibility becomes a meaningful term. Guilt in any sense of the word is only useful with the term of freedom of man. God. God is very important to the system of Berkeley. The nature of God is not so much expounded on as the relation of God to his system of immaterialism. Berkeley speaks of God as a being whose spirituality, omnipresence, providence, omniscience, infinite power and goodness are as conspicuous as the existence of sensible things. Since matter does not exist to cause perceiving, the perceiving must come from a spiritual being who is active and powerful. As the source of ideas that we perceive, God is known as certainly and immediately as any other mind or spirit whatsoever distinct from ourselves. Berkeley proceeds to argue that God's existence is much more readily seen than man's existence. The reason is that man is limited and small in comparison to the great number of ideas that man perceives other than man. Each idea that he perceives is another bit of evidence that God exists. Berkeley used an analogy to speak about seeing God. When we say we see a man, we do not see a being who perceives and thinks. What we see is a creature who has a body like us, and we conclude that it thinks and perceives. In a similar manner, we analogize for God because we do at all times and in all places perceive manifest tokens of divinity. Everything we see, hear, feel, or anywise perceive by sense being a sign or effect of the power of God. As in our perception of those very motions which are produced by man. Ideas are creations of God. Ideas existed before I was born or even the whole human race. It necessarily follows that there is an omnipresent, eternal mind which knows and comprehends all things and exhibits them to our view in such a manner and according to such rules as he himself have appointed and are by us termed the laws of nature. Berkeley did admit that we have no absolute knowledge of God. Values. Berkeley did not develop a work on ethics, but there are indications of his interest in the area from his extant works. Berkeley divided truth into three categories: natural, mathematical and moral, and this is reflected in three areas of knowledge: natural philosophy, mathematics and ethics. Empiricist that he was, he believed that ethics involved abstract ideas which, like justice, gratitude or mercy, are not perceived with the eyes, but are abstractions from particular acts that involve justice, gratitude or mercifulness. Berkeley was impressed by mathematics in his day, as were other philosophers, and he hoped to produce an algebra of ethics. Most other philosophers of the 17th century felt that mathematical treatment of ethics was possible. If this proved to be successful, it would vindicate the separation of ethics from a religious connection with the church. But unfortunately, no one could produce a mathematical version of ethics. Such an attempt would have its problems. In mathematics, most everyone agrees that 2 plus 2 equals 4. There is universal agreement on the use of math science. It was Berkeley's hope that a universal dictionary of ethical terms might be produced. Such a dictionary has never been written and could not be. Berkeley seems to have given up the hope of it. What then serves as the basis of ethics for Berkeley? He started with the basic postulates: God, freedom, and immortality. They are grounded in the natural, which is not only rational, but the rational is related to the divine, or an expression of divine rationality in nature. Thus, values are related to the laws of nature, which are expressions of God's rationality, and reason discovers the laws which are valid in all times, places, and among all men. Berkeley's argument for rational moral rules makes him an opponent of impulse or situation oriented ethical systems. The latter was opposed, for it is too time consuming and impractical to try to compute the consequences of an action. Moreover, if a situation ethic be accepted, there is no possibility of a system of ethics. If the situation determines whether an act is good or bad, then there is no distinction between good and evil at all. Berkeley believed that good and evil are related to the overall goal of happiness, that is, good tends to promote happiness and evil tends to subvert it. Happiness is a legitimate goal of man's existence, but the highest good is not strictly a sense of pleasure. The greatest good cannot be merely a temporal happiness. It can be the greatest good only with reference to God. Only God can guarantee eternal happiness. Consequently, morality requires the existence of God, just as Berkeley's theory of knowledge requires God. If happiness is to be achieved, it will be related to doing the will of God. Berkeley's essay on passive obedience makes mention of the mathematical model for ethics, but the work itself may be described as a Christian form of utilitarianism, or the view that God wills the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. He affirms that certain principles are evident to reason and may be described as laws of nature. The universal scope of Berkeley's view is seen in his comment that the good is not something private or national, but the general well-being of all men, of all nations, of all ages of the world, which God designs should be procured by the concurring actions of each individual. Hence, like mathematics, ethics should deal with universal principles. They are called laws of nature, since they are regarded as universals. Berkeley may be regarded as holding an extreme view of idealism, particularly regarding his theory of knowledge. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. Subjective idealism or empirical idealism is the monistic metaphysical doctrine that only minds and mental contents exist. It entails and is generally identified or associated with immaterialism, the doctrine that material things do not exist. Subjective idealism is a philosophical view based on the idea that nothing exists except through a perceiving mind. In this view, the natural world has no real existence as such. It only exists in the minds of those who perceive it, and ultimately in the mind of God, as expressed in the philosophy of George Berkeley, its main proponent. While all forms of idealism stress the reality of the mind over that of the body, that of spirit or matter, most idealistic theories do not reduce reality to the perceiving mind. From Plato's ancient idealism to Hegel's absolute idealism and various forms of objective idealism, the key notion is that the world of ideas has some objective reality outside the subject that conceives them. Subjective idealism's bold move is to deny the common sense notion that things exist as such and to highlight the problems of traditional theories of cognition. It does so at the expense of a convincing account of reality. Now, you can try to answer the questions given here. What is meant by subjective idealism? How Berkeley develops his idea of subjective idealism? Give a specific overview of the subjective idealistic philosophy of Berkeley. Describe Berkeley's view of reality. Why George Berkeley's idealism is considered as one of the least accepted and most misunderstood. God is very important to the system of Berkeley. Substantiate. How much Berkeley was impressed by mathematics. Hope that you can refer these books for further understanding. Berkeley's Renovation of Philosophy, written by Gavin Adley and published by The Hague, Martinus Nijhoff in 1968. Principles of Human Knowledge, Dialogues between Hyles and Philonous in The Empiricist, written by George Berkeley and published by Garden City Dolphin Books. George Berkeley Selections, edited by Mary W. Calkins, published by Charles Scribner's Sons, New York in 1929. A Philosophy of Religion, written by Edgar Brightman, published by Prentice Hall in 1940. Four Philosophies by Donald J. Butler, published by Harper, New York in 1957. A History of Philosophy, Volume 5, Part 2nd, written by Frederick Copleston, by Garden City Image Books in 1964. Berkeley, An Interpretation, written by K. P. Winkler, Oxford Clarendon Press in 1989. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic soon. Have a nice day.